What is worse, exploitation or irrelevancy? Both lead to recessions. A period of economic downturn is how it is politicized. What it really means is a plummeting disaster of value. If you live in America, you are taxed on what you earn, taxed on what you spend, and taxed on what you sell or produce. Since the year 2020, government-funded bailouts have been used to save corporations, banks, and even other countries, in order that they survive an economic crash, often created by and profited from the institutions that caused it, on a scale never before seen in history. In 2008, the Emergency Stabilization Act did the exact same thing, and perhaps not so coincidentally, became the architecture for future recession investing. How does a nation hold its leaders accountable for misjudgment? If failure does not result from error, is it still an error, or is it manipulation? The WEF, the World Economic Forum, wants to convince the working and non-working citizens of the globe that the solution is to give up more, as if to blatantly say their increased power and wealth was personal and not morally applicable to the plight of the common man. The elites of the WEF also manage some of the largest equity companies in the world, run by the largest investment firms in history, such as BlackRock and Vanguard, with people like Bill Gates, who have spent billions and combined trillions of dollars buying up farmable land, as well as entire housing markets, often spending 10 to 20% more than the listed price. We might argue that at least Bill Gates is our billionaire, but technically he is also a foreign power. That is part of the foundation of how the WEF works. It is its own sovereign nation of sorts, more powerful than many countries on the planet. Are corporations that conspire, gouge, and exploit civilization planning a future that benefits the individual in a moral way? Can we all truly be happy by owning nothing? By homogenizing the human spirit and pretending that inside we are all just clay, to be molded by perceptions and ideologies? Is that our destiny, our fate? To be the Play-Doh of other Homo sapiens that believe they are better, stronger, and smarter than us? Us from which they have taken nearly everything and ask for more. Is it a reset, or is it just slavery?
It explains a little. I think it actually explains it a lot better than I heard anyone else.
That was my goal. So hopefully I succeeded. Yeah,
because I watched several different people talking about it. I watched like Russell Brand, some other podcasts as well, and I also like looked at the World Economic Forum. Like I watched their videos, and it still made no sense. I'm like, I don't know what you want, what you're trying to do, what you are doing. Like nothing here is making sense to me. To me, it's just corporations just doing what corporations have always done, just trying to be bigger.
Just blindsiding us and trying to create more profit.
Yeah, I mean that's always what they're doing, and so this didn't seem any different to me. Like BlackRock buying up all the real estate, like homes in an area. It's like, well, okay, that's just that's good business.
What do you think, Nave?
I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying I have something.
Do. No, I'm not going to judge you. Just what do you think?
Yeah, it definitely seems like what you were saying. It just sounds like something that I was never able to articulate, but something that I kind of just felt was already happening as well. I'm kind of similar to Zach in that way, where I listened to. I didn't listen to 2 weeks worth. I listened to half of Glenn Beck's book, and I couldn't get through it. I was having a hard time like keeping information in my head. He was throwing so much economics and it's like talking about deep mining rare minerals, and I'm like, I don't know where we are anymore. Like, I don't know what
Yeah.
he's even trying to get to.
Well, one thing, a point that Glenn Beck made, I wish he worded it this way, so I'll simplify it. But basically, what he was saying in his book, in one part, was that the foundation of capitalism is to always found a new market. That's essentially what capitalism is always trying to do. So a new market
Right.
is like, if we go back 200 years, a new market was housing, because there's so much land that people wanted to live in. Now there's still a lot of accessible land, right? That is developed, can be developed, but people don't want to live there, right? Because it's too far from resource, or whatever the excuse is, too far from work, too far from, necessities, right?
Yeah.
Simple things.
Yeah.
So, but the fact that that was a booming new market, kind of like the gold rush, that was a new market, that was an old market with a resurgence. So gold always had value, but in the United States, once they discovered there was gold here, the entire world became interested in it, right? And that created a lot of wealth. It created a lot of mirth as well. I mean, but what is the outcome? There are tons, maybe thousands, I don't know how many there are, of towns and villages in the Midwest, or yeah, some in the Midwest, but mostly in the center of the United States and the Southwest, that are abandoned now because the resource there dried up, right? The market there dried
let
up.
it be coal or oil or whatever.
Right.
There's a
So
lot of towns like that are based around a single economic, and then when that dries up,
correct. Yeah.
the town dies. Like, take Detroit. That's like one of the most famous.
No, that's an excellent example. Detroit is an excellent modern example. But part of what Glenn Beck was making, the point he was getting at, was that in our modern day, there isn't much left as far as new actual market is concerned. So the biggest, newest market is us, is our data, right? That's the new
I
gold
would
mine.
say
That's the new gold
newest,
rush.
Yeah, but I think AI is gonna trump that market. Like,
Well,
once artificial
maybe.
intelligence comes up, and once self-driving cars and things like that, and all this technology boom, I think that's what's going to be the new marketplace. Besides, I mean, we'll always be part of it now that we are a part of it. Our data, personal data, will always be a part of that. But I think tech companies with AI focus is what's going to boom.
Well, that was so in the beginning of my intro. That's what I touched on when I mentioned exploitation versus irrelevancy, and which is worse. That's kind of what I was getting at, is the fact that it's a long argument. It's not something I just that just came up or whatever. But exploitation refers to, say, like the Industrial Revolution, right, where workers were treated very badly, and you could work at any age, and it didn't matter really what happened to you or what the health issues were. You were exploited for your labor, right? In order for them to get rich and powerful. But now, like you mentioned, AI and robotics and automated devices and engineering, now the threat may be irrelevancy, because they don't need us anymore. They can produce the worker that they need, the labor that they need.
Right.
So if that is, that's also part of the conversation of the Great Reset. It's like, well, then what role are we going to play? Do we just become completely gray as a human race because robots replace the worker?
I think that you become a greater human when you don't have to work. I think you now have the freedom to choose what you want to do with your life. Like, let it be art, creativity, let it be being a care provider. Like, you want to raise your children or take care of your parents or grandparents even, like, that's when your humanity truly shines, when you don't have to work.
I kind of want to jump onto that part, that idea. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure if everyone would be able to function better if they weren't working. I think a lot of people need a certain kind of structure in their life, especially if they didn't have structure before. I think about how kind of aimless I was before I finally got like a career job that it had the same time. It just gave me a foundation to where all of a sudden I was losing a lot of my free time, but I had money to do with what I needed to. And I think that people just acquiring money without any, I think there are psychological implications that maybe I don't know how to articulate off the top of my head, but that's where my like emotional
No, I know what
response
you're
to
saying,
that's
because
coming
I've
from.
heard that argument before, but I disagree with it fully, because you can create your own structure. Like you have that capability. If you can structure your day, so I'm gonna wake up at 6 a.m. I'm gonna start my day by going to the gym, and then I'm gonna work on language development, and then I'm gonna work on my artistic. It's like there's different. You can set time frames for yourself, and then you can fill your day with things, and that will give you purpose. Just improving yourself and those around you too. Maybe you want to improve the lives of others in your area.
So
And
that implies that everyone is able to like you're adding a foundation onto this hypothetical person. I feel like you would be able to do that, and I would maybe be able to do that, but like a layman, like a random person who doesn't think about these things and isn't aware that they're just wasting their time. I think about like the stereotypical American sitting on the couch drinking Coca-Cola, watching TV all day, and that's all they do. You know what I mean? That kind of imagery. I feel like if a lot of people were able to not have to put effort into working, but they could acquire all of the stimulus that they wanted. They could get porn, they could get food in high in calorie food. They don't have to worry about their survival. That they would just fall into this rut of
yeah,
simplicity.
but that's what it is that it's you get bored with it, right? So you get bored with that mundanity of just simple pleasures all the time. So you would create your own meaning. You would have to, otherwise like you're saying, you would drown. But I think that can also be taught. Like you can teach people to create their own structure. Like that's not something that you just have to be thrown into the deep end with. You can ease your way into it, even from a young age. You can start teaching like kids, like we can structure days. You can have your sports time, you can have your time to learn these different fields, you can do different things, follow your passions.
Well, part of what you both are talking about is, let's call it facility, right? What you have access to and how much control you have access to resources and assets that bring you purpose or joy and satisfaction in your life. Right now, that's up to you, right? In the United States, at least, you have that freedom to be a lazy sloth or useless person and possibly live off the system indefinitely through different means, or you can work really hard and achieve things that are monumental, maybe possibly world changing. But one of the core, let's say, emotional arguments of the Great Reset is the idea that you're going to hear this all the time, that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, right? Which to me harkens back a little bit to an old saying that goes like this: do as you're told, not as I do, right? Which is sort of that authority, the mother and father authority that corporations and government have always been sort of given respect for, right? And I think a lot of people still do look at it in that way. But how do you guys feel about that? About the idea that you could lose a lot of ownership over the things that you consider yours? I mean, what part does the idea of ownership play in your happiness and your satisfaction, or is the idea that you could just literally share everything, even in a ho hum way, would be okay, would be good enough?
I think it really just depends on like an individual's like conscientiousness or their openness with like other human beings, I guess. Like it's like while I was listening specifically, I'm going at this from Glenn Beck's point of view because that's who I had speaking into my brain for 6 hours. But he seemed really manic and scared of all this complete change, and he would keep presenting. He would like, pay attention, this is going to be super scary, and then he'd start speaking about just, this is change and I don't like change. It's essentially what my brain kept like, this is the information I'm getting from this, whatever this is. And it's the loss of ownership that does worry me in a way, but I'm a little bit more kind of see, I don't know how to explain this, so I'm going to give the floor up. This is a hard thing to articulate.
No, that's all right. What I don't understand what that's in context to, because it can't just literally mean you'll own nothing and be happy. Because how could you own nothing and be happy? Like that doesn't make sense.
Well, that is, I think, that's the conundrum, right? That's why it's sort of a clickbaity kind of thing to say. I think one good example is to use, communistic countries. So like China,
Oh, yeah.
right? So I have some friends who live in China, and most of them are actually pretty happy with their situation there, even though right now things are terrible. One of my friends, he's in his 50s, and uh, to put it into context, like you don't think about having to worry about, say, rent or having a place to live. Everyone has a place to live, right? So the way he paints it, again, our communication is rough because he doesn't speak fluent English and I
Right.
speak zero Chinese, so it's kind of ignorant of me. But um, is that people that are poor who live on the streets, they're the ones that are just so lazy that put no effort into being useful to society, that they willfully decide to be there. So homelessness is like a willful thing, and they have severely less homelessness than we have here. Now, visually, if you were to compare their, let's say, ghettos or their low rent districts, might consider it as sort of, like the low caste in India, or even like the shanty towns in California
Okay.
here, something like that. So it can be grim, but the state, basically what happens is your usefulness to the state is measured. So you have a value, and we talked about this in a previous podcast about the value of human life.
Mhm.
In China, that is measured directly, and you have a very good idea of what your worth is to the state, to the country. And that is a measure of your skills, your intelligence, how well you can be educated, how fast you can learn things. I mean, everything. The data of a person determines where you fit into society. And then you can build on that to climb that ladder, but everywhere is a ladder.
Mm.
Now, technically that exists here in the United States. And my favorite description economically and socially of the United States is not democracy. It's not even republic. It's feudal oligarchy. That's technically what we have here, right? That's why there's so much difference between each state, say Texas and Illinois. The people are different, the economies are different, the way people live is so different because the oligarchy that controls that economy is separated in different ways by distance or influence. Though
Right.
even that is being great because of our connection through technology
I would
now.
say definitely there was a much bigger difference before the internet between states than there is now. Before there was like rapid communication.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, look, I remember having a phone attached to a wall, and having
Yeah.
to I used learning how to use a map to get places, knowing streets and telephone numbers memorized. I feel very stupid actually to rely on those things. But that is an example of owning nothing, because you don't have ownership of where you live. You don't have ownership sometimes, I think, even of like the car you drive. Everything is sort of awarded to you in a system of how useful you are. So I think what it can be boiled down to a lot of times is, do you have a problem with authority? When you see a lot of people like
Yes.
rebelling, if you have a problem with authority, then you have a problem with that kind of system, because
Yeah. I definitely do.
that seems, yeah.
No, I definitely do have a problem with that. I would, like you describing the situation in China is like, I would hate that. Like that sounds awful. I mean, it sounds nice to be able to not have to worry about rent, but I also like to be able to own a building and be able to rent it out if I want to,
It makes
Like,
me curious because you say if you were there you would hate it, but I don't I might, not that I would disagree completely, but if these people were here, they probably would feel like they would hate it here as well. But I think people become acclimated to their environment more than people would like imagine. I think that
well, I
the
just mean
first
I
thing I'm
hate the
thinking about,
idea of that.
yeah, I personally, I as well, I don't like the idea of not being able to like control my environment, my own like personal surroundings. But I think about this book called it's by Viktor Frankl. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. And I think about this book a lot when I think about this kind of thing, like China and communism and stuff. I think about one thing that he said was that misery fills the human body like a gas. So how gases fill up gases fill up an area is they spread out and they fill the whole entire area, and that's how misery is. So no matter how much misery is put into the human body, it fills up the body. It's kind of like a I don't know, like a everyone's subjective experience for misery, but he does that in particular for the concentration camps in World War II, the German uh, whatever they were called, Auschwitz and stuff like that. And he would talk about how everyone was in the worst possible situation that they could possibly imagine, but they were laughing and they were happy. They were like just continuing their day. This was just their new existence. And I think that even though it feels like an objectively worse life to be in like communistic China and not have control of anything, I feel like if we were just dropped in there after a few months, we either completely rebel and get killed off, or we realize what our situation is now, and then we acclimate and just become part of that system.
Yeah, no, you can definitely adapt to different situations. I think humans are very adaptable, and that you can find the silver lining in anything, right? But like that doesn't mean that it's not a good situation. Like I still think that like there's still objectively better places you could be in, or different better states that you could be in.
I think what interests me most about the Great Reset narrative is how that in media, and that includes social media, the target is us. It's always brought down to an individual level, as though we make the decision, and yet we live in a world where our decisions have almost no power outside of what we have to do in our day-to-day lives. And one thing that I found interesting, I forget who pointed it out. I want to say it was Brett Weinstein pointed it out. Yeah, the media focuses on the individual as though it's our responsibility to allow this change, or even to execute this change in the world, this great reset. And yet we don't have that power, not directly, right? The world decisions are made for us in the world we live in all the time. And I find that really interesting that the narrative is brought that low, that they conduct themselves with an authority they don't ask for, right? They just do what they want, like what rich people, powerful people have done throughout entire history.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's just like inherent.
But then they make the conversation, they make the conversation seem as though it is ours to guide. Why that play is what I'm always curious about. Why, because this is the point I wanted to make from Brett Weinstein, was that in America, we're raised, it almost doesn't matter where in America you're raised or what your political ideology, you're raised with the idea that you can be anything you want, right? That you can do anything that you want. You're almost like this perfect being. All you've got to do is apply yourself. You want to be a famous athlete, just got to train. You want to be the most intelligent accountant or coder, you just got to train. But one thing that one of my friends in China pointed out to me is that you learn there that you can't just do anything you want. It's a more practical approach to life. You have to test yourself to know what you can do. And that struck me. I thought that was because I've always felt like I've had that opinion, right? I feel like somewhere in the middle of I can do anything and let me see what I can do is where we should be. What do you think about that?
It's like one of the great horse trainers says, it's like any horse can do any maneuver, just with different quality. So all humans can do anything. I think we're super beings, and you can literally do anything. You do just have to apply yourself. But it's the applying yourself that is hard. Will you be the best? I don't. Maybe not.
That's how practical is that then? Like if you wanted to be a basketball player, you're in tremendous shape, but could you be an excellent basketball player?
I would say if I trained long enough and didn't have my back issues and all this other stuff, before that, I could have. Yeah. If I tried,
but before, I mean, like right now. So that's
right now,
like how practical is that mentality?
I would need to have surgery that would like fix my back, but even then, I could still learn I could still train to jump higher. I could push through the pain that I'm currently in if I really wanted to.
So for you, you definitely lean more towards the ideal that we've been raised on, that we can.
Yeah, no, I definitely believe we can achieve and do anything if we want to. I think it's difficult, and I think it's very hard to stick to a path and to follow it all the way through, because people want things, but they don't have the fire. They don't have the drive to actually obtain the thing. I mean, you were trained to be a knight. You could see how other people who would want to be a knight couldn't just become a knight. Like they didn't have the actual drive to do it. It wasn't what they really wanted to do.
Right. What do you think, Nave, about that and the motivation that requires us to do things that we want?
I definitely think that there are a lot of biological factors that are introduced whenever you, because like clearly, I mean, everyone knows like kids are born with cancer, some kids are born paralyzed or deformed or something. Like there are some kids are beautiful, more beautiful than others. Don't take that out of context, please. But the uh, the idea that anyone could do anything, I think if you take that literally, it's obviously not true. So I'm not gonna be like a facetious guy about it. But it's interesting that you were talking about these people wanting to be knights and then just not having the drive, and it there's so many factors that go into that. The way that I imagine human beings as far as like their potential to do what they want is I think about them as like logs that are to be whittled down into wooden statues just slowly on one of those spinning machines. And I think about some logs are very tall, some are wide, some are like chipped in the inside or something, but you are, as you're going through life with your experiences, your life and yourself, your consciousness are slowly whittling down at this log to create some form of beauty. And it's up to you that to some degree what you're doing, but sometimes you're going to make a mistake and damage part of your statue, and your statue has, you have to pivot, you either pivot or you just stop and try to examine what's going on. And that's kind of where my mindset was at while you guys were talking, if
So
that
you're
means
saying like
anything.
there's natural talents that people have, right?
Oh,
And then
absolutely. I've definitely experienced this like in my own. I have some weird kind of like, I'm really good at pattern recognition. Like everyone knows what they're good at. Like they know things that they excel in. Like whenever I picked up the guitar with three other people. We all started playing at the same time, and I just jumped over them. I leapfrogged past them because my brain, I wasn't thinking about how do I become creative or artistic. I thought, wow, there are just a bunch of patterns on this thing. I can just memorize these patterns, and now I'm making sounds, and everyone around me goes, whoa, you're doing good, even though I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm like, this is just a pattern, and everyone around me is like, you're so creative and you're doing great. But it's like, I'm not trying to be creative. I'm just trying to recognize the scale, like a pentatonic scale. You know what I mean? It's a different like mindset, a way of thinking that I don't think I was raised to have, but I think that was probably something that I was just a natural talent I was born with. Like it
You
makes me
guys,
very good at video games as well. Like it's just
I actually want to say something about video games that I think relates to this, but I'll save it for a little bit later. But I was going to ask, do you feel that? Hold on, dinosaur. I keep losing my thought. I got too much in my mind. Hi, this is Marko from Audio Pong, your podcast about the human experience. During this short break, please consider supporting the show by checking out our Patreon page in the links provided, at AudioPong on Twitter, and listen to us on any of your favorite platforms. What helps more than anything is sharing AudioPong with others. You can also contact us directly through email with audiopong@gmail.com. Zach and I appreciate your support. Our goal is to keep making content that matters. And now, back to the show.
What this world needs is a restart. Whoa, whoa. Yeah, yeah.
By the way, Nave, dinosaurs are my way of, or our way of like a cut.
oh,
Because like
it's
we
a
just say
safe word.
dinosaur randomly, it catches your attention. Like, what the hell are they talking about? Dinosaur, in case you missed something. Shit.
We tried to do when me and Philip were streaming, we were trying to have a word for clip that so that we would know where because he could make marks in the stream, and we decided on waffle fries. But then it became a joke that we would randomly say waffle fries, and it would be funny to us. So we would include waffle fries in the clip, negating the entire reason for making the code word up.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah,
That's pretty much what we do with dinosaur.
Well, I hope we don't start doing that too often.
No, not the joke aspect, but the practical aspect.
Yeah,
of it.
right. Because if you just start throwing dinosaur at me in the middle of a, I'm
I
gonna be
mean,
like, shit, what went
I
wrong?
talked about dinosaurs on our conspiracy theory.
That's true.
episode. They helped build the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs helped build the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs helped
They
build the
did.
pyramids.
God, that would be such a cool video game if you had like an RTS or something. You would build Egypt with dinosaurs. That hasn't been mixed yet. They should do that.
Yeah.
There's
It's a
an
survival
interesting
game
RTS
where-
called Age of Mythology. It's not dinosaurs, but it's like adding mythological creatures and stuff into the real-time strategy. It's really cool.
Okay, I'm gonna pick something else because I forgot my original thought. So dinosaur. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the media and social media. Now, this comes up a lot, and we've even had conversations focused on it. So I don't want to, segue too much, but it's my opinion, at least, that the media has always segregated us. But I think with how powerful and inclusive and intrusive the media is now, especially social media, it is really being used against us, and it is definitely controlled by the corporations that own it. The question is why? What is the benefit? I have my conspiracies of why it's useful for civilization owners and planners and managers to keep us fighting each other, but why is there less brotherhood? Why have those who have died literally for unity and brotherhood, like Martin Luther King or John F. Kennedy, why have their efforts seemed to be fading away? We seem to be going backwards rather than forwards when it comes to accepting the differences in each other, especially if we're to have a great reset where all of us are supposed to get along no matter who we are or what we think. Do you feel that your differences should be homogenized? Should a community should there be one global community and we just all have to learn to get along?
I kind of like to use Occam's razor for something like that. Like my gut reaction is to go, I think humans have always been fighting, and nature is in fact just inherently chaotic to a point where we have to be aggressive about our own survival. I think our own instincts are honed to that. I think I heard from you guys when you guys were talking about where your brain, the way that you respond to somebody being negative to you on the internet is the same way as you being threatened in real life. It might have been you. I might have attributed that to the wrong person. But
no, we talked about that. Yeah, the relevance of like how the brain measures fear and emergency.
Right.
It's just for the brain, it just has levels, a max and a minimum, let's say, like a gauge, a throttle. And what triggers it is what I guess you could say irrelevant, right? Whether it's a nightmare or an actual emergency, your brain is going to respond chemically the same way. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
That kind of, in a weird way, loops back around to my Viktor Frankl point of misery feels like a gas in the body of the vessel. It's like what exactly was I getting at? The division. Oh, Occam's razor. Okay, so my brain just immediately goes, well, these algorithms are designed to keep our attention for as long as humanly possible, and the people that are mediating these algorithms are human beings with their own biases who may or may not be aware that they are subtly influencing the narrative in some way, especially since all of these tech companies are in one singular area. It makes me think about this whole I don't want to use this word, but the globalists. The globalist idea. What I really dislike about that is that all of these areas they all have their own unique cultures and their own unique sorts of people. And it's obvious if you just drive from the East Coast to the West Coast, you're going to see so many different kinds of people and with different kinds of leanings in all different directions. It's having something to control all of these people. I would almost argue that the United States is too big. Like the United States should probably be like 4 or 5 countries. Like because Florida is a completely different place than Oklahoma. Like I don't know if you've been to Florida, but I have no idea what's going on over there. But it's this idea that we have this one government to control all of these different cultures. It's like if they have to make a law, but they have to apply that to the people in California, but they also have to apply that to the people in Kentucky. You know what I mean? And so how do they make laws that are because laws are literally just blanket rules that go over that's the foundational rule for our society.
Well, that's why it's broken up into federal and state government. Is so the states still have their own say in how their state is run and what laws their people have to follow. Now, you want to talk about great division within the country? Talk about just within the state of Illinois. You got Chicago, and then you got a rural towns. Like they're completely different. Cook County is different than Ogle County by entirely. Ogle is like like a farm country.
Mhm.
Like, and it's all within the same state of Illinois. So to say like though that the same laws apply across that is even difficult to do. But I mean,
I agree.
how much are you gonna do it? Fiefdoms? Like how small do you want to go?
Yeah,
And I
it's
think
not.
I think there's greater power in numbers, right? Like if you all can come together and work this out and just kind of like, that's why it does subdivide into those different things, so people can control their economies and their laws and what rules they had to follow. You can burn paper in this town, but you can't in that town because of different pollution rates and driving hazards and things like that. You can own chickens in your backyard in one state or in one county, but not the other. So it's like, it all that's why it's broken down, is so that you can have those fine tuned, but you can
That ties.
still have everyone come together and under one country, even a large country like the United States, which is a large country. I would say Russia is probably the only country that's bigger. I'm sure there's a couple more out there, but like we have a bigger population than Russia. Most of
Yeah.
our land is habitable, where Russia's isn't.
Similar to Australia. That does tie up that does tie up kind of, not my point, but kind of my rambling a little bit pretty well, because when you're talking about how small is too small, how big do you want to get? And when I was talking about this in reference to social media, I think that the entire world is a little too big. And it's this idea
Why?
where all of these, well, it's you see these people, us humans, we all are very tribal. We all want to find our groups that we are in, that we fit in, and we want to defend those groups just by our nature. And you see this playing out on social media, and you see this playing out in the political climate in America, and you see it playing out in the political climate of, like you said, well, I can't remember where you said Illinois, but it's like you make fun of California for being super liberal or Texas for being super conservative, but Austin, Texas is crazy liberal, and the northern part of California is crazy conservative. Like if you look at a political chart of their counties, like how they
Mhm.
vote. And it's like the what is the Dunbar's number? It's
Yeah,
some
150.
sort of similar kind of like mentality I have
Dunbar.
for.
Yeah, the Dunbar number is where how many close interactions you can have at a time. You can have 150 close relationships at once, and you can keep track of how everyone's interconnected and what their personal relationships are with you and others. I
Yeah,
mean,
so
that's the number, but it varies from person to person.
it's not like I don't want to be literal with it, because I'm going to give people gotchas, but that's kind of where I am at with the way that you can interact with people. Like at some point, people aren't people. Like if you're looking at words on a screen, that's not a human being, and I think that contributes a lot to the animosity, because I've had moments where I'm arguing with a friend on Facebook, and then when we meet in real life, we're like, hey, that was kind of stupid, wasn't it? Yeah, sorry, we were just, I don't know what came over me. I'm a teenage boy. So it's like,
Well, there's
um
that. You have that anonymity to a degree. Also, you don't see how your words are impacting the other person, so you don't have the same empathy or with that person, because you can't see how they're acting, so you can't feel how they're acting.
Well, you know what?
yeah.
I remember the first thought I had when I went to the very first internet chat room back. This is back in the '90s, right? Like free AOL CD or disc, rather. It was just a floppy that shows up in the mail.
48-hour trials.
You get 48 hours of AOL chat and mail and all that. And I remember going to a chat room, and the first thing I thought was, boy, these are some false bitches in here, because everyone is so brave when they don't have to face you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's no threat of me slapping you because you crossed a line with me. And this idea that, well, I mean, even the laws, you mentioned Illinois, the laws in Illinois are still pretty strict, but they're still like, laws that allow, let's say, men or just people in general to get physical with each other based on a difference of opinions, let's call it. But even that seems to be so taboo now. And yet that's how I grew up. I mean, that's like when I was a boy, that's how you solved the problem. We didn't negotiate. We didn't have, the Council of Trent has convened on the issue of the baseball being thrown in a friend's face, right? You just went over there and pushed him or wrestled him or punched him, whatever. Now, I don't have any boys or any children, so I don't know how things have really changed, but I see it in social media and I see it in the children of my friends and family members that they have this cowardice, this fear that's been sort of built into them, that's grown in them. I don't know if you want to call it built, that's maybe too conspiratorial, but it definitely exists. This idea that they're only brave on their phone. They're not brave in reality. And maybe that's holding them back as well from pursuing things. I don't know. How well does that hurt motivation?
No, that's an interesting point though, because I never thought about that. That you can be brave on your phone, but not in real life, regardless of if it's being a physical altercation or just approaching a girl or going after a promotion. I never thought about if it makes you less brave.
Can I add to that Sunday for you? Put a little cherry on top of that.
Yeah.
I listened to a guy on YouTube called Larry Lawton, who's an ex-con, and he made a really good point in a previous video. He said a lot of or a good amount, let's say, of gun violence from police officers these days is because they grew up not fighting. They don't know how to take a punch and they're afraid to be hit. So their immediate response is the strongest one they have, which is their gun, their lethal weapon. And he's like, in his day, if you had a beef with a cop or you just weren't obeying him, he would just take his belt off and beat the shit out of you. But now they'll just, click the hammer back. So I just wanted to add to what you're saying.
I have a really dumb anecdote, but this, from my experience, it's like it's the same. What you just said with the police and not wanting to fight. It's very similar to how you play video games and our attention span and our ability to accept failure, where you can just play a puzzle, and at any point in time you have the gun, you have the button that goes, I'm done with this, I need to sit in now. You can just Google whatever the hell the solution is to this thing and then get through it. It's a similar situation to that. That's where I started thinking about it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too, and I don't know if we're going off track, but I think about that often too, is how we kind of are in the Matrix, right? I mean, when I need to install something in my house that I've never done before, even like work on my car or plumbing, I've never been trained as a plumber, and yet I know how to do, how to fix things underneath the sink and what have you, because of YouTube. I don't even have to read anymore. I just watch a video. I used to remember I've taken out books in my life from the local library on how to, work on a car to help my father when he made me go, kind of thing, right? Learn how to learn. And yeah, with that is interesting. The attention span, I think, affects us too, as far as what we consider important and things. I mean, we're at a point where things just flash in front of us now. And I mean, like world issues, right? It's hard to hold focus on anything.
It's been like that our entire lives, I'd say, even from the 90s at least. It's been
that's the dawn of it, right?
It's been one craze after another. Desert Storm, the World Trade Center. War on Terror, global warming.
Yeah, but even those things have years between them, right? Now things are by day.
I'll give you that.
Yeah.
I'll give you that it has definitely shortened over the time. I mean, just look from COVID to Ukraine to now. We're not even talking about Ukraine anymore.
Well, I agree. The veracity hasn't changed, but the frequency certainly has.
Right.
I think,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The turnover rate on news stories has definitely.
Well, memes for me, memes started. I even hated the word meme when that became a trend on the internet because it doesn't refer to any actual meme. And I had just when that became a thing on the internet, I think I had just finished reading like The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. And anyone who talks about genealogy and biology, they talk about memes because it's a scientific term, right? So what we call memes in media, those aren't memes. But whatever, that's the word for it now. And memes started out as just sort of the joke you hold with yourself that everyone can relate to becoming sort of philosophy. I mean, memes are delivering headlines that contradict, that make sense, things like
Dude,
that.
I for the longest time I was getting my news from iFunny because I didn't watch the news, and I would
Just
get,
that
I would
statement
get,
alone.
I would get like current events from my iFunny. I'm like, oh wow, okay, like I didn't know that was happening. Cool.
I could,
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I've absolutely learned about current events from memes, like just seeing them and going, "That's not true," and then learning that Bill Cosby might not be a good person, and I'm like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah, I mean, if Christ is real, is that how we're going to find out?
Yeah, right. It's
Facebook
through memes.
There's something so sad
The
about
miracle meme.
it.
Yeah, I think this. I think about that often too. I think the saddest part about the way we communicate now is that it is so impersonal, and because I mean, even I can't help it. I mean, I'm in my opinion, I'm an actor at heart, right? I love generating personas and entertaining people, and for me, having grown up with the dawn of the internet, it's always been an access to that. To some degree, I'm not myself when I'm on the internet. I troll all the time. If you were to read my comments on YouTube or Reddit, you'd be like, God, this is the most toxic piece of shit person out there. This is the reason we can't have nice things. Like that's how I sound sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not me. I'm literally just testing the social boundaries of strangers. And that's pretty rude. Like you wouldn't do that. Like you wouldn't go to a concert and talk to 100 different strangers and just say crass things to get a rise out of them, right? Because in reality, again, going back, you might get punched. You might cross a line and then learn you crossed a line.
Yeah.
But on the internet, you can cross, in social media, you can cross lines constantly. It doesn't matter. And you can do it visually too. I mean, that's what TikTok is. TikTok is the evolution of textual trolling, of incitement, right? That to get a rise out of other people, to listen to yourself and to edit yourself and to make yourself look as good and sound as good as possible. You can't do that in reality. In reality, I fuck up all the time, right? I would think we all do. I can't tell you how many times I've said the wrong thing and I realized how insensitive or just stupid it was.
Or walked away and thought of the perfect comeback.
Yeah, that's the worst.
God damn it.
I call that the shower review.
Yeah, there's like something like Hebrew word for it where it translates to stairway wit. So it's like
stairway wit. I like that. Yeah.
Because as you're walking down the stairs, that's when you think of it.
I like that a lot.
That's great. Yeah.
So yeah. One other thing I wanted to point out about this concept of the Great Reset, and I mean, to me, it all comes down to corporations. They run the world, and when you research anything about this, what's funny is that there's one word that explains it all, but it's never used. I haven't seen it in an article or even heard it in a book, read it in a book, and that word is monopoly. That's literally what's going on, is the return of the great monopoly, the whole idea of the Rockefeller, right? Buy out, push out all the competition by making your services or goods cheap. And then once the competition's gone, then you charge more than anyone ever charged before, right? It's a pretty simple concept. It happens to be the world we live in. And I think that is often an argument against capitalism, right? That the idea that is the bottom line should always increase. You're always trying to make more, and prices are always going up. Everything's always becoming more and more and more. There's never a line. There's never a line of satisfaction or a plateau that we can just live on. Like, for example, why couldn't we just have the economy of the 1980s and the technology of 2022? You think, wow, that's because, the right away your brain argues with you. But that really, I find that like when I listen to myself, I find that argument isn't mine. And if I start to like rationally think about things, I go, yeah, why 1980? I could go back to 1954 or just say 1947, like just right at the end of the World War II, and say, let's live in that time, but just add the technology. There is a logical way to like make that fit, to make that work. But it isn't the world that we live in for some reason. We're raised as consumers.
That you wish it was. Then I don't understand the difference between
my point is that
the different decades.
Well, I obfuscated it a bit, but my point is that in my dream world, we live in a world of satisfaction. We establish a system of systems that we're happy with, where we think the most moral good is being done, and then we leave it alone. We invent new things, great, but we don't allow those new things to completely rework
our happiness, our satisfaction.
Yeah, but I think those new things are bound to rework your civilization when they're
Well, we're letting them, because our civilization is run. We live in a global economy. That's part of what the Great Reset is. The World Economic Forum
right.
isn't a conspiracy. They're real. I mean, the idea of the Great Reset isn't.
It's not a theory.
It's not a theory. This is something that Klaus Schwab and the most powerful elites in the world are doing. They're working.
They're
on
trying
it.
to enact.
Yeah,
but I mean, technology is bound to change the world regardless of. You know what I mean?
Yes.
How do you not let it change the world? How do you not let the internet?
Well, I don't know. That's what level of enforcement does there need to be? How strict do our laws and our enforcement of those laws have to be?
And then at that point, you're stagnant. You don't know if you could get better. Maybe you can get better.
Well, that brings me back to an analogy. That brings me back to a story with my grandfather. He was very old school Bulgarian man, and he loved to have his shoes repaired and wear hats like a man straight out of the 30s, right? And one time I used to go with him often when I was very little in the 80s. And one time in particular, we went to this hat store, this haberdashery that he just loved. And there's so many hats in there. And I remember looking through them and trying them on and just having a good time. Like, I thought, man, this is so cool. There's so many different styles of hats. My grandfather was a very quiet person. He didn't spend a lot of time. And then he picked out a hat and then he left. And I remember thinking, how did he know that was the right hat for him? Right? There's so many hats and he didn't look at all of them. He didn't try all of them on. How come he was just able to make that decision so quickly? And I asked him, and he said in his broken English, he's like, there's many hats and maybe there is a better one, but this one is good. And that always stuck with me. And that laid the foundation of what I would call satisfaction, the ability to just be satisfied with what you have.
Yeah, but how do you negate FOMO? How do you just like, yeah?
Well, you have to do it consciously. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Like, it's something, I don't know if it's in our genes, and that's the weirdness of humans and why we rose to power on the planet as a dominant species, or if it's because we've been raised to be consumers, because everything we see and do is wrapped in branding. It's a commercial. I mean everything in your house is a commercial for a product or a way of living or a concept.
I also buy so little things. So when I do buy something, I want it to be the best thing I can buy of that particular thing. Like, I'm not going to buy, like, if I'm going to buy flip-flops, they better be some goddamn good flip-flops. Because I'm not going to buy another pair until, like, I absolutely need flip-flops for, like, the shower room or something. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, they better be good flip-flops.
Yeah, I hear.
Similar,
so like, I don't know,
like, because it's like, how do you find out what the best flip flops are? And it's the flip flops that you see everyone wearing. It kind of like leans into Marko's point as well, a little bit.
Right, but I don't think it's just the ones that you see the most. I think it's the ones that fit your needs the most. And you can do that by looking at different reviews, and it could be anything. Maybe it's a speaker, right? You're looking for like a what do they call that? A sound bar. You don't want to buy like the first one you see at Walmart. Like, you want to do some research. You want to do find the ones that have the best, not just reviews with stars, but like actual like tech companies that, like, this is what they do. They review speakers, they review sound bars for their job. And this is you find out from different sources, see which ones you agree with the most that fit your needs, and that's what you do. But I think that's part of, and then when you buy another one, you don't just buy the same speaker again. You do the research again, because by the time you need a new one, the technology has changed.
Okay, but apply the mentality to
a world government.
No, to you earning money. So if your necessities are met, what is left? Basically, if your necessities are met, the way I look at it, this is my opinion, everything else is entertainment. So if you are alive and healthy and living well, and you don't have to worry about those things, then everything else is an entertainment. So a flip-flop, a speaker, or a hat, anytime you want more of those things or you want to replace them, what do you need more of? You need more money. So that's where I'm trying to put a wedge or a checkpoint, is where in that is satisfaction. Where can I just say, this speaker is good enough, I don't need to replace it, or if it breaks, I'll just want to repair it. And that was my grandfather. He never he had the same shoes for like 40 something years. He had them repaired because they were good enough. They were good shoes, and the only reason he bought a hat that day was because presumably he lost his other one, or it wasn't a fashion statement for him. A hat was this, in a way, a part of him. So where is true satisfaction? And I think the reason I bring that up is because I feel that all builds into why we are so confrontational with the powers that control society. Because what's interesting to me is that, like, notice how elite people are caught masquerading in their opulence, and I mean presumably at the expense of the ignorant, which is us, right? That their activities match our own fantasies. Like, the most powerful people in the world seem to have the simplest desires. I mean, if often enough, it's in higher, aberration by contrast. But at their core, they're just drunk perverts like the rest of us, right? It's like recently, an example would be how a Pfizer-sponsored yacht party, I think it was off the coast of Florida, like in Miami, was for a Colombian presidential candidate. His name was Rodolfo Hernandez, and he lost. But his stance was anti-corporation, and yet he went onto a party, a boat with a DJ and liquor and drugs and hookers. They're just women dancing, but that's what they are. And the whole party was thrown by Pfizer. And in fact, there were Pfizer executives on the yacht partying with him and whoever their entourage was. So that's funny to me, because that's like the common single man wants that, right? Like, that party looked like fun to me. Like, why wouldn't I want to do that, right? And yet those people are in the upper echelon. They're in the upper 1%. Their decisions affect the lives of others. Maybe in the case of Rodolfo, of Hernandez, had he become president, it would have been the entire country of Colombia. And it seems so petty that he was just on some small yacht. A yacht's a yacht, but it's a small yacht off, near Miami, partying with some local hookers. I don't know. That just seems funny to me. That no matter what, we're still human, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. I think money can change a person, but it doesn't like change your carnal desires. I think we all have those same things, those same wants and needs and drives. I agree. Yeah.
So what do you think, Nave, about the old saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely? Is that cliche, or is that just something inevitable in any human?
I think it is inevitable. I think mostly what that absolute power corrupts absolutely. It makes me think about. It makes me go back to. I'm not going to do the Viktor Frankl. I'll think about Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who talks about the Gulag Archipelago. That's his books. He was a Russian. And he talks about what was I'm trying to recall the exact saying that he says. It's very similar to that, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But essentially, it's a very similar situation with Viktor Frankl, where these people, as they move up and down their class, essentially, oh man, I cannot articulate this because I just want to think about that thing. So never mind.
That's right. Work it out.
Well, so
I want to hear it, because I've heard of the Gulag Archipelago, and I haven't read it.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, it's
No.
I basically once a year I read it or listen to it on audiobook. But let me see. There's an abridged version that don't read the 3 because there's so much like needless information in them, like scattered throughout. But what was he saying? You threw me off with that because I had it queued up, and then when you said that, I'm like,
oh shit!
I was like,
And then I dropped the question.
Yeah, I was like, that's an interesting question. So,
well, before I dropped the question, just to summarize, I was talking about how, like I said, we're all just drunk perverts. It doesn't matter at what level of power we seem to wield. That seems to be, it seems such a simple desire, right? To have, I guess that's also what I was getting at, is that these people, these Pfizer executives in this case, they have this immense power, or a presidential candidate. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying they shouldn't party. Absolutely, they should have fun. But that's what influence. Like, that's how they're bought. That's how they're they're motivated to agree with Pfizer's decisions, or or to be bought out that way. That seems so cheap to me. Like if I feel like my price would be a lot higher.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. you know, and that it's such a petty. Those are such petty desires, and I call them petty because they're mine. I'm near the bottom of the totem pole here. So
No, it's like when you look to someone that you respect. I'll take it like this. Like I think of myself, since I have a difficulty reading. It's like everyone I either can read, so therefore they're all automatically smarter than me.
oh,
Like,
that's so not true though.
it's like but then I like talk to some people that can read like well enough, and I'm like, oh shit, I was wrong.
That is hilarious. I love that point of view.
So you had
anyone
to,
who can read is
you have to think about how
Go ahead.
that affects your mind. Like, how much information can you have? It kind of touches on our the attention deficit thing we were talking about, or attention span. I mean, sorry, but it's like not having the ability to read. Does that in some way like open up your brain to have more abstract thought, or have like they talk about the Aborigines?
It definitely makes me think differently for sure, but it makes me work harder because things just come more difficult to me. Like I have a learning disability in English and math, so I have to try harder than everyone else in everything I do.
Mm.
So like I just have a better work ethic in those like studies than most people, because for them it just kind of came naturally. Take like Brett Favre, wasn't necessarily a naturally gifted quarterback, but he fucking worked for it, right?
Yeah.
Like he earned that. So therefore, once he got to the point of naturally good talent, he already had the work ethic to push past the rest of the people that had their naturally good work ethic or naturally good talents.
It's interesting.
So like that's how it is for me with like a lot of my pursuits of knowledge, is that like most people can just come across knowledge and they're like, okay, that's okay, whatever. For me, I'm like, I'm always working to understand new things and new concepts, and to fill my brain with alternate perspectives.
It's the way that I imagine it. It's like, do you think in imagery, or do you think in words, or do you think in a combination of the two? And I think about that for all kinds of people, and I think it's different for different people, because I ask people that question all the time, especially when I'm drunk. But I'm like, because I hear people will be like, I think primarily in images. I assume, and I would think I primarily think in images as well. But like, just that idea can imply that people with different languages that are structured differently, most languages are structured differently than the English language, they also have different trains of thought. I have a foreign exchange student friend named Victor. I almost said Brazil. We call him Brazil because he's from Brazil, but so he goes by Brazil, unfortunately. But his name is Victor, and he loves that idea. Like, he never really thought about it, but he's like, I absolutely do have a different train of thought, because Portuguese is such a vastly different language than English, and I definitely think in words. Right. He's in med school. He's about to become a doctor in a few years, and he talks to me about how just the fact that he has to reshape his mind in order to get information to me, because the train of thought is completely different in Portuguese than in English. It makes him think a lot more abstract about so many other different things, and just the idea of not being able to read just interests me even more, because I'm just like, now I just want to only talk about that, so I got to stop talking.
No, it's a good question. It's got me thinking.
I think primarily in imagery, I would say, and then a lot of feeling. Like, it's just like I don't know people's names. A lot of the people I work with, I don't know their names. They just kind of like have this like feeling in my mind that's like this is what I see in you. Like, this is what I'm seeing from your that you present yourself as. Like, there's the gay happy guy. You know, that's one of the guys. That's how I know one of the guys at work. Oh, he's the gay happy guy with tight skin.
Yeah,
but like. So it's like, that's kind of like how I think. It's like, it's not necessary. Sometimes it's words. Like when I'm listening to a book on tape, obviously I'm thinking in words. And like, if I'm really trying to focus on material that's being taught to me, I'm repeating what they're saying in my head. And that helps to cement it.
So just to get some final thoughts about our conversation today. I guess one broad question would be, do you feel that the Great Reset will succeed? Will this endeavor to recreate the world in a presumably less democratic way, less republic, less democracy, will succeed? or are we the people fighting back? Are the countries of the world and the communities of the world fighting back with their voice? Which, by the way, I think we can all see as being censored, or at least in part.
My immediate thought was back on the Glenn Beck book where he was talking about climate change. I'll loop this around, I promise. But he was talking about climate change. He's like, the climate is always changing. It's always cooling and it's always warming. That's the definition of climate. But then he turns around and he's like, he doesn't apply that same thought process to the idea that culture changes as well. And he was fighting to maintain the American way of life and the American values and all of that. And I'm like, that's fine, you can do that. That's your prerogative. But it's interesting that you're so closed off to the idea that the way that the world the way that the world functions and interacts with each other isn't going to fundamentally change as our world becomes more and more connected. Like every single year it becomes insanely more connected. And there are two primarily in my head kinds of people, just like on the left and on the right. Like, and you're somewhere in that little line. And the world needs both of those people. Just like we need both halves of our brain, the world needs both of these kinds of people that think completely differently, because that's how we evolved and that's how we came up. So in conclusion, I think that
when one system doesn't work, you switch to the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's good to have one system that switches. I think it should be a conglomerate of the two systems, somewhere in the middle. Like I think we need the crazies on the left and we need the crazies on the right, because then we can find out where the middle is. That's kind of a compass, like a good polar north and a polar south. That way we can find our way along this ridiculous map that we find ourselves on now. But I believe that to some degree, the Great Reset's probably just going to happen, and there's not a lot we can do about it for the most part. I don't think it's 100% exactly how it's been laid out. I think that that ideas from this are going to be taken and used in whatever the net result is. And ideas from the complete opposite, the people completely against this idea, are going to be taken. And I think that that's just kind of always how humans have adapted as a generalized society, as long as we don't decide to nuke each other, which would be bad. That would be the real Great Reset.
Yeah, right. Yeah, nuclear winter. There we go. Do I think that the Great Reset will succeed? Yeah, like he's saying, in some aspects, of course it will, because I mean, we've already changed the way we've done things. I mean, just go from most people working in homes or working at businesses to a lot of people coming to work at home. So that's changing. More people are starting to move out of the city and into rural areas. That's part of the Great Reset as well. I mean, and corporations coming together, I mean, at least they're organized. I think that's a good thing. It's better to have organized chaos than just complete chaos. So yeah, like you were saying, I think aspects of the Great Reset are bound to happen and bound to occur and just come to fruition. What do you think, Marko?
Well, I think you're both right when you mention that what will stick, so to speak, will stick around. I think that's what they're doing now. I think we're seeing a lot of things being tested socially, economically. I mean, it's affecting even the way things are being engineered and the way things are being sold, which is interesting, because now what the main narrative on any social media is, whether it's left or right, it's all focused on minority. There seems to be never really be a conversation about the majority, and that goes for any topic, not just the obvious ones. Which I think is interesting, because it almost makes it feel like the real audience is the majority, almost like this is a circus. And if you feel like you don't fit in with anything that's being argued, then you're in the audience. I think that being only in the audience is dangerous, and it bothers me that my main desire in life is to be an audience member, not to be an influencer, right? Not to set trend or to influence others, even though my default position is always a doubt peddler. I'm a devil's advocate almost always. That said, I think they will succeed in applying changes to society that will restructure us and shake us. And I think they will ruin good. I think it will ruin more than it will help. And I think because I believe history is just one gigantic cycle, not just in man, but in nature, like with ice ages and volcanoes and what have you, that from that destruction will be rebirth. I think we're going to have a generation or two that will realize, boy, our forefathers really screwed things up. And, it's because at some point, the founding fathers, I feel like we're reaching a point where the founding fathers of America are starting to fall into sort of like the Greek mystics, right? Even though they're not thousands of years old,
Yeah.
they're so far removed from our
Yeah.
mentality, our modern mentality, that we treat them like Aristotle or Apollo or Socrates. So that's what I think. I'd like to thank you both, gentlemen, for a great conversation today. Want to mention also an extra special thanks to Nave for joining us from the Gaming Together podcast. You guys got a great podcast, and I really enjoy your banter. I also like that it's more of an adult, if I could just say that, it's more of an adult take on gaming, which is cool to me.
Oh yeah.
And if there's anything, Nave, you want to add to our listeners about your podcast or your personal endeavors?
Just gaming together, a cooperative podcast. We mostly talk about playing with your friends from the perspective of old high school friends that reunited a year ago on the internet. We are on Twitter at Game Together Pod if you want to find us over there. We have a Facebook too, but I try not to get on that site too much. Philip runs that side. That's the other half of the show. And I love Audio Pong. This is an awesome show. I listen to you guys every week, and I'm so glad. Whenever I'm in my mail truck doing my job, I'm always listening to you guys and just arguing, just talking to myself in the truck. I think everyone thinks I'm a psycho. That they have a psychopath mailman, unfortunately. But
It was psychopath mailman.
you're one of the only shows. You're one of the only shows that get me actually just pausing the show and being like, no, I think this way about that maybe. And
Well,
so
that's
I've just
awesome.
been wanting to be on your show for like months.
Well, that is awesome.
I'm glad we can
and
get
we
it.
thank you. We want to have you back again, and we'd like to get Philip again on the show, and vice versa. So thanks again for tuning in, and y'all have a great day.